All right, let's get started. People may be trickling in as we're going, but we'll do a little bit of housekeeping and some introductions. But thank you all so much for joining us this fine afternoon or morning or potentially evening, depending upon where you are. Today we are joined by one of my colleagues, Eric Smuda, who's going to be talking to us about CX transformation, which is the key to truly valuable CX program. My name is Alexandra Gibson. I am the VP of the corporate business segment and the head of strategic initiatives here at InMoment. And as I mentioned, I'm joined by Eric Smuda, who is one of my great colleagues, the principal of CX strategy and enablement. I'll get a little bit more into his bio, but wanted to hit on two quick housekeeping items. One of which is we always get the question, is this being recorded? Yes, it is being recorded. So you will have that in your inbox probably within the next 24 hours. Second question is, what do I do if I have a question? And we get that all the time. And so if you look at the icon at the bottom of your Zoom that says Q&A, just drop your question in there as it comes to your mind. And then towards the end of the presentation, we will be answering those. If I see any in there, I may interrupt Eric, but don't want to break up his flow too much. Yeah, so done with the housekeeping. Let's jump into the meat of it. Eric joins us from our practitioners team. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to meet any of our practitioners, it's a really incredible team that we have here at InMoment. They are all people who have run CX programs, have been in your seat. They've really driven tremendous transformation in CX in the industry. And now we have the advantage of having them on our team and great resources for us. I learn so much from them every day. A little bit more about Eric's background is he has built a distinguished career out of turning venerable brands such as Compaq, Hewlett-Packard, Avis Budget, and Hertz into CX powerhouses. His novel, impassioned approach to customer experience implementation changed the face of the rental car industry, in which he found award-winning ways to connect customers and companies. So it's only fitting then that Eric serves as a principal of our CX strategy and implementation here at InMoment, lending his seasoned perspective to many of the company's clients around the retail, hospitality, software, and financial services industry. So without further ado, Eric, I will let you take it away. I've already let you know I may have questions as we go along, so forgive me as I dive deeper, but I will let you take it from here.
Yeah, please do. Let's make it interactive. So thank you, Alexandra and Andra, and welcome everybody. Thanks for being here today. You know, those of you who don't know me will find out over the next hour. I like to be blunt, right? CX programs are not moving the needle. Right before COVID hit last year, and yes, it was just last year, despite the fact that all of us have aged a decade since then, Forrester published an article stating that 25% of customer experience professionals would lose their jobs in 2020. Now, this was pre-COVID, came out about a month before that. And here's why, right? People are not able to show the ROI from their programs. CEOs, CFOs, they're constantly in the press. They're constantly on earnings calls talking about how their companies are competing on customer experience. But they need to see a return on that investment, and they want to know they're making the right decisions. You see this framework here. This is the continuous improvement framework that we use here at InMoment. But we talk about stagnant programs on the previous page. Stagnant programs are because we're spending too much time measuring and listening to customers and not enough time doing things and not enough time improving, right? Not enough of time and focus is spent on actually improving the customer experiences. I showed you that framework. Actually, let me back up a slide, right? I showed you this framework. So design is about what are you trying to accomplish with your CX program? Listen is really about how do you listen to your customers? How do you gather their feedback, whether that's surveys or non-surveys, you know, structured or unstructured data. Understand is really about how do you make sense of that? You know, that might be through data analytics and key driver analysis. That might be through merging operational data or financial data with your survey data to truly understand why did it happen? How did it happen that way? Why are customers feeling this way? And what do I do about it? Transform is then really doing something about it, taking that knowledge that you gained in the listen and understand stage and really driving change in your customer experience. Realize then is, what's the ROI? What did I do for my company? What's the net benefit for my company that came out of all of this? And it really becomes a circular approach then, because as you drive changes and you realize results, customer experience is a journey. There is no end, right? This is not a destination. You never get to be the best because customer expectations are constantly changing and constantly evolving. So this becomes a continuous circle here. Oops, going the wrong way there. But here's the problem, right? And I said this a minute ago. Too many of these programs out here are really only measuring. They're really only doing that listen and understand stage, right? Think about your own world as a consumer. We are inundated constantly with surveys. How was this? How was that? But how many of those experiences that you have as a consumer actually improve on a daily basis? Think about that, right? The businesses that you do business with, how many of those experiences are really getting better on a day-to-day basis or even a year-to-year basis? Here's why. We're stuck in the listen and understand phase. And if that's all we're doing, right, we're not actually transforming. So that's what we're going to talk here about today. I told you I was good. Whoops. Trigger happy with the finger today.
So Eric, you might actually jump into this a little bit more, but this really already resonates with me because I talk to so many of our clients and then prospects too, that they sort of are just kind of at the first level of scratching the surface. And they say things like, well, we want to measure our NPS, you know, and so they're already thinking from an outcome perspective of the measurement is the outcome.
Right.
And so how do you, and you may get into this more, so just say, hold on. But, you know, how do you start in a program and start with the end in mind? I know you said it's a continuous circle, but how do you start better than just saying, hey, I just want to measure NPS?
Yeah, we are going to get there for sure,
Okay.
Alexandra.
Okay.
But I think the quick short answer for now to that question is, why do you want to measure NPS, right? So many companies come to us and say, we want to measure NPS. It's important to our CEO. He or she believes in NPS, and we want to do this. Why? What are you trying to accomplish with it? And that gets to really the design stage and begin with the end in mind is, why do you want to measure NPS? What is measuring NPS going to enable you to do? What changes are going to come from, hey, I know my score is 40. So what? Is that a good score? Is that a bad score? Is it better than it was yesterday? Is it better than it will be tomorrow? So what, right? You know, we didn't get into it in my bio. I've been doing NPS since it was first created, and I'm a huge advocate of the Net Promoter System. But I'm an advocate of this system, not the score, right? Why do you want to measure NPS? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to change about it? So we will get to the second part of your question there, Alexandra. I told you I was going to be blunt. If all you're doing is listening and understanding, you are not doing customer experience. Right? If that's all you're doing, you have a VOC program, you have a voice of the customer program, you don't have a customer experience program. And that gets to Alexandra's question. Yeah, and I know you're going to say, hey, the industry uses these terms interchangeably, and they do. They are not the same thing. Far too many programs out there that call themselves CX are really just voice of the customer programs because all they're doing is listening and understanding. And then they throw their data or their findings or their insights over the fence to someone else in their business, hoping someone will catch them and hoping someone will take action on them. Here's where you need that full framework, right? And it goes back to Alexandra's question. Why are you trying to measure NPS or OSAT? What are you going to do with it? What are you going to learn from it? And the reason I love the Net Promoter System so much actually gets into that. It's not about the score. It's about what are you learning from your customers and what are you going to change for your customers? So getting to that transform stage, which is really what we're going to talk about, is really where you need to get to. Right? The most successful programs start with that design stage, define what they're trying to achieve, define what that end looks like. And then they drive changes through that transform stage and measure and understand the ROI those changes realize for the company. Now your CEO and your CFO can go back to Wall Street or back to earnings calls or public presentations and say, here's what we got from our CX program. And that's what really makes you successful. So what are we going to talk about today? The importance of design. I just alluded to that a little bit. How does design set up the actions that you're going to take in the transform stage? We're going to talk about 3 best practices that the best CX programs have in common as it relates to driving transformation in their business. And I'll give you a few examples of companies that are successfully doing that. Why design before listen? I kind of teed this up a minute ago. You need to define, what are we trying to achieve? What does our ideal CX state look like? What does our best-in-class customer experience look like? Or what does our good enough customer experience look like? You don't have to be best in class, right? Maybe your company is such that you say, I just want it to be good enough. That's okay. But you need to define it. You need to understand what you're striving for. You need to understand and explain to the rest of the organization, here's what we want our customer experience to be and why we want it to be that way, right? The more people understand it, the more they understand what the goal is. Now you've got the organization pointed to what that target is. Now you know where to spend your time and effort to say, are we achieving that? And if not, why not? And what do we need to do about it?
And so, Eric, when you've thought about number 1 there, has it many times been more qualitative? Like, what is literally thinking about the customer experience, what is that going to look like? Or have you thought about the quantitative pieces?
Yeah, I think it's both. I mean, that's a great question, Alexandra. I think it's both, right? And this is hard work, right? I mean, this is why a lot of companies struggle is, hey, it's easier to throw up a survey and measure your NPS and measure whether you're making progress or not. What do you want it to be? And it's why you see a lot of the CX programs, especially the successful CX programs today, having that design element included in their program, right? Too much. When I think of successful customer experience programs, I think of 2 paths. There's your break fix path, which is really fixing the experience of today and improving today's experience for customers. But there's also that design element of what do we want the experience to be in the future? And thinking through that, evaluating where are we relative to our competitors? Are we ahead? Are we behind? Are we in the middle of the pack? Are we good enough with that? You know, what's our operational capability in the company? What are we able to achieve? Right? So many businesses right now are struggling with supply chain issues, with staffing issues. There's no doubt that's having an impact on your customer experience. Is that okay? How are you going to mitigate that? How are you going to define what success looks like? So, you know, if all you're doing is running out and measuring, that gives you a good idea of what you're doing today. But you're just running around in the dark with no aim there. So yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of art to it and there's a little bit of science to it. So some qualitative, some quantitative for sure. All right, as we discussed earlier, as I keep preaching on here, right? CX is not just another activity in your business. It is your business. It's a core part of your business. And your board and your C-suite expect you to show a return from your CX program. Well, how do you do that? We think of this in terms of impacting one or more of these four key economic pillars. How am I helping the company grow? How am I helping get more customers? How am I helping us save more customers, right? A saved customer is worth far more than a new customer and costs much less to keep, right? Am I selling more to my existing customers? Am I increasing their lifetime value? And am I helping the business do this more efficiently? You may have one of these goals, you may have all four of these goals. You need to find a way to tie this back and sell to your C-suite. How am I impacting? How's my CX program impacting one or more of these goals? This gets back to the design stage, right? Why are we doing this and what do we hope to accomplish? You know, the last piece you really need to enable your CX transformation efforts and to really deliver that ROI that I just talked about is to understand the linkages through your system here. How do your internal business metrics, how do your internal operational metrics link to the feedback that you're getting for customers, right? How does the outside and the inside connect? How does your understanding of your metrics predict what customers are going to say? So, you know, as you're measuring NPS or OSAT or customer effort, whatever you're measuring, it doesn't matter. Do you understand what the key drivers of that are? And do you understand how those drivers link back to the operational metrics that you're measuring every day? Then, do you understand the linkage to those 4 key pillars that we just showed? How are these things, how are changes in your operational metrics laddering up to drive changes in customer perception? And how are they driving changes in these metrics? If you don't understand that, as I said earlier, you're shooting in the dark and you're just hoping for results. And let's face it, hope is not a strategy. All right, 3 things we're going to talk about. I told you 3 things, 3 foundational things that you have to do and you have to get right if you really want to be successful with transformation efforts in customer experience. 1, how are you organized around taking action on customer feedback? And how are you going to manage that process across the company? 2, action planning. And how do you manage the closed loop processes? And we'll talk about that here in a minute. And 3, managing a portfolio of projects. And we're going to talk about that as well. Improving your customer experience is not a one-off effort, and it's not a single project effort. And we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. Let's start with organization. I like to call it governance. Let's face it, all of our businesses, right? Businesses around the world, but especially American businesses, are organized in silos. HR, finance, operations, IT, it goes on and on and on and on, right? Customers don't care. They don't care how you're organized. They care about whether your products and services meet their needs or do the job they expect them to do. So customer experience is really the ribbon. It's kind of that blue circle there, if you will, that connects all of the silos and cuts across all of these silos. And to do it effectively, you need to close the gaps between these silos and ensure that there's clean handoffs from one to the next. So when managing customer experience across these silos, the most successful companies put in some kind of governance structure or committee. Let's call it a customer experience council to manage this. What this council is really trying to do is create a shared focus, a shared alignment on what you're trying to achieve. It's trying to create cross-functional visibility and accountability, right? We can't just say, hey, operations, go fix this. Hey, call center, go fix that. No, let's share that responsibility and hold each other accountable and have visibility. And the reason you do this is because customer experience, as I said, cuts across these silos and really is a system, right? You have to manage this as a system and not have each silo trying to optimize their own work. Because sometimes when you optimize a piece of this, you actually sub-optimize the whole. Complicated, pretty chart, lots of colors, right? Here's how that governance council that I talked about a minute ago fits into the rhythms of your company. The governance council here is in green, right? It should have executive sponsorship. It should be chaired, I mean, ideally, if you really want to be successful, it should be chaired by either the CEO or one of his or her direct reports, right? That gives it the executive level visibility it needs. But if not, you need at least one of your ELT members to be the sponsor here. And you see a lot of bigger companies now actually hiring chief customer officers to be that person. So the council manages the activities of the tactical working teams that you see here, as well as communicates expectations throughout the company and particularly to your front lines, your customer-facing associates. The truly best-in-class companies have what I call CX champions or CX ambassadors throughout the company. You know, these are the people that sit in those silos we talked about a minute ago and really are the champions for, you know, both the communications from the CX council and the representatives on that CX council, but they're also the champions within the business to say, we need to think differently. We need to put our customers first. Why are we doing this? You know, Alexander, the thing I hate most as a CX practitioner is when you ask the question, why are we doing this? Well, that's the way we've always done it. That is the wrong answer. Why are you doing it, right? There has to be a reason, there has to be a purpose, and it has to be customer driven. Let's talk about an example here. I'm going to use Reliant Energy. Obviously, there's lots of great examples out there, but I'm going to use Reliant Energy. For those of you not familiar with them, they are the largest electricity provider in Texas. And if you're not familiar with Texas's market, they are the nation's largest competitive electricity market. So you don't have to use Reliant. You can choose any of the 50 or 60 companies that are offering electricity there. So highly competitive. What they've done is very similar to that page I just showed you. They've got what they call monthly customer first meetings. They're actually chaired by the president of Reliant Energy. They discuss CX metrics. They discuss updates on key projects they're working on right now. And they talk about upcoming initiatives, things they're going to be working on. These meetings are opportunities for leaders to celebrate success, discuss strategy, and make sure everybody stays committed to this CX journey. In addition to that CX council or their customer first council, though, they've got 40 to 45 CX champions scattered throughout the business, people that are taking the work of the council and championing that, as we talked about. There are also people that serve on the closed loop teams, contacting customers, determining root cause. And the other thing that really makes this work for Reliant is they've got a great peer-to-peer recognition program as well, where peers can nominate other peers when they see them doing great examples of customer experience or customer service. They've been at this now since, let's call it 2013 or 2014. Have they gotten results from this? Absolutely. NPS has increased over 150% in the last 5 years. Their complaint rates have dropped over 60%. And in a highly competitive electric market where everybody says, hey, that's the ultimate commodity and I'm just going to go shop lowest price. No, these guys have set a new record each and every year for renewal rates. So they are keeping more and more of their customers, which absolutely impacts their bottom line.
So Eric, one question that I had as I'm hearing you talk about this is probably a lot of people on this call are CX managers, CX directors, like they're running the day-to-day of a CX program. And yep. There are, I love pulling people in. That's just so important from other parts of the organization. I think it's the most important thing about making an organization run, period. But when you have so many people that have competing priorities or like, yeah, that sounds great. Like, how do you recommend that people who are running the CX program influence across the org and even up to the CEO who maybe is like, yeah, we need to measure these things, but I'm not going to be involved.
Right. So two things. First of all, as you talk about CX directors or CX managers on the call today, customer experience is not a department, right? It may be, you may sit in that department, but customer experience is everyone's responsibility, right? And so it's your job as the customer experience department to get them to see that and get them to buy into that, right? You alone can't fix the customer experience. You need partnerships. And so to your question, Alexandra, here's where it goes back to those economic pillars that we were talking about, right? What are the customer experience issues costing us as a business? What's it costing us dollar-wise when we have more calls into the call center? What's it costing us when customers are churning, right? Here's where I would encourage the CX managers and directors out there, partner with your finance teams. They know this information. They know what a call to the call center is worth. They know what a point of churn is worth. And start tying these issues back to dollars. Here's what it's costing us with customers. Here's what it's costing us as a business to serve these customers. And conversely, as you make changes, hey, here's how we saved more customers and here's the revenue that accrued to the company as a result. Here's how we lowered costs. Here's how we lowered calls into the call center. I'll give you a good example from my personal experience. When I first joined Hertz, heading up their customer experience organization, I went to the call center and I said, tell me the top 10 reasons why we're getting calls in the call center. Reason number 2 was people are calling in to get a copy of their receipt. That was costing the organization millions and millions and millions of dollars. Really? How about we have them log in on the website or get into the app and get their own receipt? Just by changing something like that, we were able to save the company tens of millions of dollars by reducing calls into the call center over something that they should have been able to do themselves. So being able to tie it back to dollars, either positive dollars or negative dollars is the way you have to go with this. So if you're not partnering with your finance teams and you're not using dollars as a way to convince people, it's a struggle, because then you're relying on the goodness and the intentions that they have as opposed to showing them the business benefits to doing this.
Absolutely. Such good points. Everyone print out that slide of the economic pillars.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. So hopefully everybody is familiar with the notions of inner loop and outer loop from the Net Promoter System. So you don't have to be using Net Promoter. You don't have to be an NPS company, or maybe you measure CSAT, maybe you measure customer effort score. Hopefully you're aware though of the notion of fixing the inner loop and fixing the outer loop, right? The inner loop's about one-to-one learning and one-to-one feedback. What are the actions you can take with an individual customer based on their feedback? The outer loop comes about when teams huddle together and determine, hey, I keep hearing this same feedback from 10 customers, 20 customers, 100 customers. What's going on systemically that's causing those issues that we keep hearing this feedback? So that's where the huddle kind of brings it together and says, wow, you heard that, I heard that too. How many times did we hear that? The outer loop then becomes, how do we do root cause analysis and understand, why is this happening? What can we do to prevent it from happening? Maybe it's a new process, maybe it's redesigning products, maybe it's changing policies or processes in the company on how we work. Whatever that may be, to implement some kind of structural change that prevents this from happening. The outer loop's one-to-many, right? Now you're not just fixing one customer's problems, you're fixing many customers' problems. And the key here is also communication in both of these loops, right? Inner loop, you're communicating one-to-one with an individual customer and resolving their issue. Outer loop, marketing and PR are communicating to your broad customer base to say, hey, here's the things we've heard from customers, here's our new way of doing business, here's our new product, whatever it might be. So, the inner loop actions are generally one-to-one, well, almost always one-to-one, and they're quick short-term things, while the outer loop is really one-to-many, and these things take longer to come to fruition. Let's talk about a company that does this well. And a lot of you guys may be smaller companies and you say, well, yeah, it's easy. They're enterprise companies. They've got lots and lots of resources. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to be a big company to do these things, right? I've consulted with companies as small as 200 people or even smaller on these things. It's really about, are you listening to your customers and are you doing something about it? Customers expect their cable to always be working and always be optimized for maximum speed. Unlike at a store where you're out of an item or the restaurant's out of your favorite special, yeah, that causes disappointment. But think about when your cable goes out, even if it's just for 5 minutes, you're angry, right? The reaction is much stronger than, hey, they didn't have the shirt in red that I wanted today. And that's even more true now with COVID and the pandemic. During these times, more people are working at home. Streaming has exploded in the last 2 years. We need our cable to work, right? Think about it. You expect it to be on 99.999% of the time, if not 100%. So let's talk about inner and outer loop here. 3% of their customers had an issue and wanted a callback, wanted a resolution. That's 1,000 customers a month or 12,000 customers a year. Well, they know the average value of their customers. So 12,000 times a year times the value of the customer, it's $23 million in annual revenue that's at risk for them, right? Put it in your context, right? You might be a small restaurant. You might be a small service business. What's at risk about, think about the impact of a lost customer on your business. Put it into that context, right? The organization uses our text analytics and our real-time routing tools with our case management application to create cases, assign them to people, and have the appropriate person or team follow up. The other thing that's important here is sharing information with their frontline employees. Here's everything that the customer has experienced. Here's everything they bought from us, so that when you're having a conversation with the employee, you don't have to repeat, oh, I just talked to Jane in the other call center. She transferred me. Now I have to repeat that information. Arming your people with the right information and the right talking points is critical here. I talked about, hey, you might be a restaurant or a service company. In this day of social media, all it takes is one bad experience. You know this, right? They post it on YouTube or Instagram or whatever. Now it's seen by 100 people, 1,000 people, maybe even 1,000,000 people if it goes viral. So you really got to manage that inner loop and resolve customer issues, before it gets out of hand. For the outer loop, and here's where we go back to tying customer experience back to data, right? The average churn in their industry, 17%. Think about that. 17% of their customers leave every year. That's worth millions and millions of dollars for them. And they've done the analysis to know that customer satisfaction declines right about the 1-year mark. So what are the things they can do, 9 months, 10 months, 11 months to try and stem that churn, to try and get that 17% just down to 16%, just down to 15%, right? So they've done a lot of analysis around the root cause of why these things happen and what they can do to put in place. Apply that same business, those same principles to your business as well. All right, I talked earlier about this idea of portfolio management, right? In addition to creating that shared accountability structure and communicating across the company, the other key function of that governance council or committee that we talked about earlier is managing a portfolio of projects that the company's working on to improve the customer experience. Right? I told you earlier, you don't just have one project. So companies should really be evaluating projects based on these 3 criteria, right? How easy is it to get done? What's it going to cost us to get it done, right? What's the benefit of getting it done? And how many customers is this going to impact? And so, as you use these 3 lenses, you have a portfolio of things. Actually, I'll just make it easier, move to the next slide. You have a portfolio of projects here that some are short-term quick wins, right? Brilliant basics. Oh, I got to fix a broken website link, or, I need to close the loop and follow up with customers. Fine. Easy to implement, may or may not impact a high number of customers here. And probably doesn't have a huge cost benefit, but it's very easy to do, right? Versus moving up the chain, your strategic change, digital transformation, anybody working on that, right? Impacts all of your customers. Had it not been for COVID, I think would have taken a decade, but hey, somehow magically we've been able to scale that down to 18 months. But, so you're managing this portfolio of some short-term quick win things that can show a quick ROI, that can show improvement, while you're also trying to accomplish these bigger things like launching a new product or launching a new app and digital transformation. So that's the third piece here with the governance council, is really about how do you manage this portfolio of projects so that you're showing some quick wins, but also working on things that strategically and fundamentally are going to change your business over time. And there's a rhythm to this, right? If you think about this governance council, here's an easy way to set this up. Right? Month 1 is really about understanding our fact base. Your CX team, your VOC team saying, here's everything we know about the customer experience. Here's what the call center knows. Here's what the social media team knows. Here's what the website team knows. Here's what the retail or the operations teams knows. Here's everything we know about our customer experience. Then the committee gets together, right, and says, okay, based on that, here's the 3 to 5 things we want to go after. And look, you're going to look at that and you might say, oh God, there's 25 things that we have to fix. It's going to take us forever. Focus, right? Focus your energy. No, even the Comcasts of the world, with all of their resources, they can't do more than 3 or 4 things at a time. Pick your top 3. Charter a team, commission a team and say, I need you to go fix this. Here's the resources, here's the budget, here's the support from this team that's made of senior leaders in the organization. Come back to us next month with your plan. What's in scope, what's out of scope, what are you trying to achieve? We bless that, we commission that project, and the next several months then become those teams coming back to the council with progress updates. Here's the progress we're making, here's the roadblocks we need cleared, here's the additional funding we need, right? And using that those executive teams and those executive leaders to help clear the road. And this becomes cyclical. As projects finish and you say, hey, we worked on the first 3, 2 of them are done, third one's in progress. Okay, now we'll tackle number 4. Now we'll tackle number 5. So, don't bite off, don't kind of goes back to that old saying, how do you eat an elephant? Right? One bite at a time. How do you fix your customer experience? One project at a time. Baby steps. One of my peers in the company likes to say, strive for a lot of singles, not the occasional grand slam. Keep stacking up the base hits. That's how you win the game. All right, let me talk a little bit about my experience with governance then here from my car rental days. This is what we did, right? We got the president of operations to be our sponsor. We spent probably 60 days ahead of our first meeting gathering everybody in the company that had customer experience data. So let's tap into the call center. Let's tap into the CRM people. Let's tap into the website people. Let's tap into rental operations and say, what are all the things that we know about the rental car experience? What do we know about our customer experience here? We laid all of that out in meeting 1. Meeting 2, we came back and we said, okay, you saw all of the problems that we have, we've got to fix. Let's have a quick voting exercise. Let's get people around the table to join hands and commit to each other. These are the 3 things we want to go after. We actually picked 5. So these are the 5 things. Okay, before the end of that meeting, we said, you're going to own project 1, you're going to own project 2, you're going to own project 3. Come back to us meeting 3. Come back to us meeting 3 with a scoping document that says, okay, we've done some root cause analysis. Here's the scope of what we're trying to fix. Here's our project plan. Here's who I need, and here's the timing I need to do it. Fine, sign off on those. Meetings 4, 5, 6 became project updates. What kind of progress are you making? What kinds of things are you doing? So, within 6 months, we had fixed a whole bunch of broken problems on our website. We had fixed a whole bunch of problems in the app. We had created a new product, a new rental car product that created $1 million within the first year. So, right, baby steps. Some of them were easy, some of them were hard, but because we had that shared accountability and that shared visibility across the organization, it wasn't just, hey, call center, go fix this and we hope it works, or operations, go fix. No, they had to share in front of their peers and commit to this. So they hold them accountable for getting it done, as well as pitch in their own hands and resources to help this get done. Our NPS improved 20 points in 2 years from this. So, more importantly, we outgrew the industry from a revenue basis, and our profitability actually went through the roof, increased profitability as well. So back to tying it to your financials, right? All right, sum this all up, right? What have we learned today? It's time. In fact, it's past time to get out of your measurement mode, right? Start taking action to improve your customer experience. If you're still in measurement mode, work with us, work with whoever or your internal resource. How do we shift from measuring to improving? How do we take those baby steps and start getting those singles, right? How do we share feedback with customers broadly across the organization and get organized in that response? And here's what I will tell you. It is well past time, long past time, to stop what I call scoreboard watching. Alexandra referred to it, talked about it earlier. I'm measuring NPS. Scoreboard watching is what a lot of companies do. What's my NPS score? What did it do? Did it go up? Did it go down? Did it go up? Did it go down? And they just kind of watch their metrics. Okay, what did you do to change your metrics? Right? What steps have you taken to make that NPS score go up? What steps didn't you take that caused it to go down, right? Get out of scoreboard watching mode and hoping they moved. Remember, we talked about this. Hope is not a strategy. And start taking real action tied to a tangible ROI. This is where you'll find the greatest success for your company. With that,
yeah,
I'm going to open it up to questions.
This has been great. We do have a couple of questions that have been coming in. So I'll start with the first one. Do you have any advice on how to convince stakeholders who are really tied to the metric to shift to a value mindset?
Yeah, and I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, Alexander, right? It's showing them the impact that it's having on their business, right? Either the business as a whole or even their part of the operation. It's partnering with finance again. It's tying this to real customers, real dollars. What is this costing us as a company? What missed opportunities do we have as a company, right? So if you're still scoreboard watching, as I call it, figure out a way to tie that to, to real metrics. One of the, for those of you in the CX space, I'm a huge fan of Jean Bliss, who writes frequently in this space. One of the things she talks about that I really love, put a jar in the middle, in a very visible place, or if you've got this governance council, put it in the middle of the table and show them, here's all the customers we gained this month. Put a marble in there for every customer, every dozen customers, every 100 customers, depending on the size of your business. And then take out marbles for every customer you've lost, right? Get people to see this is real. These are real people. These are real dollars.
Yeah, I love that. The second question here is, what do you see as the difference between enterprise customer centricity and stakeholder centricity?
That's a good one. And there is a lot of talk out there right now about, should we be focused on stakeholders? Should we be focused on customers, right? Stakeholder, for those of you not familiar with stakeholder centricity, right? It's your ownership. It's your, maybe you're a publicly traded company, so it's your stockholders. Maybe you're a regulated utility, so it's your regulators. It's your, it's your employees. It's all of these things. Starts with employees, it leads to customers, all the rest takes care of itself, right? If you are taking care of employees and doing the right things by them, and if you are taking care of customers and doing the right thing by them, the rest of this takes care of itself, right? When you take care of customers, what happens? Your retention rates, your renewal rates go up. Guess what? When those go up, you make more money. When you make more money, your stockholders, your shareholders are happy. So start, I think too many companies are getting caught in the trap of, I've got too many masters to serve, right? With stakeholder centricity. Start with your employees, and we're seeing it now going on in this country, right? You see all this talk about the great resignation and people quitting jobs because they're just not happy with their jobs, whether they have another one lined up or not. Take care of your employees, they will take care of your customers.
It sounds like we have an employee experience webinar that we should be getting on the calendar.
Absolutely.
for this group as well, especially if that's where you start.
Yeah.
Next question is, do you have a perspective on gathering and analyzing unexpressed complaints, which often represent the majority of negative CX issues?
No, this is a great question, right? This is the iceberg, is really what this is, right? Some percentage of your customers, typically a smaller percentage of your customers, are willing to be vocal and are willing to share their complaints. The greater percentage of customers are not. That's the ice below the waterline, right? And they just walk away. So, two things there, right? As you get customer complaints, to the extent you have visibility to this or the ability to do this in your customer base, look at, I got this complaint 10 times. How many other customers probably were impacted by this, right? So, I had a good conversation with a CX person in an airline one day. The seat back entertainment was broken. Okay, how many customers did that impact today? How long has it been broken? In their case, they know exactly which customers that impacted because they know who sits in each seat, right? So figure out from the complaints you do get, how many other people might this have impacted? And secondly, for customers who churn, for customers who leave and they just leave quietly, call them back and ask them why, right? Lost customer analysis, lost customer interviews are such a great way to learn. You probably won't get that individual customer back, but you will learn, especially if you do this frequently, you will learn, why am I losing customers? And what do I need to do to stop that from happening? So I think those are the two ways I'd go about it there.
Great points there. Another person writes, I've long held that VOC equals what a customer wants, while CX is what a customer gets. Would you agree or disagree with this?
Yeah, that's great. I think there is certainly some truth to that, right? When I owned voice of the customer at both Avis and Hertz, and earlier in my career as well within the technology space, we used to talk about VOC is measuring customers' needs, wants, and expectations. CX is delivering at that. So I love this quote, because what you're measuring is what they want and what they expect. CX is what you're actually delivering. And so the challenge then becomes, are those two things in alignment or not? Right? Back to that slide I had earlier with all the silos. Here's where CX is a team sport. Marketing, particularly marketing, PR, and sales, they set your customers' expectations, right? They tell the customer, here's what you should expect from our brand. Here's what our brand's all about. Here's what you should expect if you do business with us. Operations has to deliver against that, right? So then it becomes, well, HR plays a role in that. Who are we hiring? How are we onboarding them? How are we training them? IT plays in a role there. What are our digital tools, both internally for our employees to use, as well as for our customers to use? So marketing and sales have set this bar, or set this expectation. How well does the rest of the company deliver against that? And then what's the gap between what did they expect and what do we actually deliver? So I think there's a fair bit of wisdom in that quote.
Yeah. Thank you. I like that question. That helps
kind
of align some of that.
I'm going to reuse that for sure in the future.
Yeah, of course, definitely. Next question. What's the difference between a promoter and an advocate? Or is there a difference?
Yeah, I mean, my first reaction is there probably isn't a difference, right? I think the word promoter has probably gotten a connotation now because of NPS. Oh, a promoter is somebody who gives you a 9 or a 10, right? On the scale. But if you strip away the NPS aspect of it, I think a promoter and an advocate's the same thing, right? Ultimately, they are people that are willing to say, not only do I keep buying from you, I'm willing to advocate for this brand. I'm willing to tell somebody else about it. And that's one of the lost pieces of like the Net Promoter System is, okay, hey, great, I got a high score. I've got a lot of 9s and 10s. How do you activate those people to go out and talk about your brand, right? Whether it's social media, whether it's over the back fence, depending on what your product is. If you're a local restaurant, how do you get people to get on Yelp or get on, here I live in South Florida, we have this thing called Nextdoor, which is really a community website as well to share recommendations. But how do you get them to get out there and advocate for you? More importantly, and Fred Reichelt talks about this with the Net Promoter System, how do you get them to be your sales force? How do you get them to be your marketing, right? Companies could save a fortune in sales and marketing expenses if they could get their promoters to be their advocates. I apologize for using those words. So, I think from an English definition standpoint, they're probably similar, but I think promoter, like I said, has some connotations now. But it's really about how do you get those people to say, hey, I'm a 9 or a 10. Okay, go tell others. Bring your friends.
Yeah, and that really goes back to kind of what you've been talking about for the last 50 minutes. How do you go beyond just the listening and measuring piece, and what do you do with that if you have all of these people that are so excited about your company and your brand? Don't just pat yourself on the back. Do something with that.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
You're in a good position then. Yeah. You talked about this a little bit, but how do you get people on board to devote resources to CX teams? I think we talked about how do you get more influence, but what about the resources piece? Especially when they feel like they don't have that to give. We're all, doesn't matter what business you're in, you're all resource constrained.
Right. No, and look, that is reality for businesses today, right? And it probably always has been, but certainly these days, that's the reality. It goes back to, it goes back to that notion of silos and where we as American businesses are a little bit broken, because you get into medium and large companies and it's like, hey, what's important to me is what's important to my VP and my senior VP. And so my silo business plan, trumps what's best for the company or the customer in this stage, right? So, two things, and I think we talked about it in the last 45 minutes or so here. One is showing them the business impact and what it's costing them to not devote those resources. And two is that whole notion of the governance council, right? Because when you get that set up and it has enough teeth to it, it becomes a shared accountability. It becomes shared visibility. You go around the room and the head of IT says, okay, I'll give 2 people to do this over the next quarter. And somebody in HR says, hey, we'll find some, so suddenly peer pressure takes over, right? And I think that's the other thing that we talked about a little bit that I would expound on is start with baby steps, find the small wins. When I was at Avis, I'd find the airport manager that was bought into this and work with them to say, okay, what can we do to fix customer experience just in your airport? Let them sell it to their peers, right? You're from corporate and nobody out there wants to hear, hey, I'm from corporate and I'm here to help, right? I mean, it's the running joke. Fine, let the peer sell it to the peer, right? When I could get one airport manager to be successful, they would stand up in an operations meeting and say, hey, here's what we did. You should try this too. I can just sit back, put my hands behind my head and go, yes, now I know where my next group, right? So
it's like having your internal promoters.
Yeah. Create your internal promoters and don't boil the ocean. Start small. It will, if you're successful at it, it will spread. I don't think that you have to solve all of the company's big problems all at once right off the bat.
This parlays well into the next question that's kind of talking about the CX Council. Do you have any tips for how to educate your CX Council on CX design, like creating a foundation so they know their role and how to focus on solving problems for customers?
Yeah. I mean, this is a fantastic question, right? Because it, as I said, as we were wrapping up, start with employees. Employees will take care of customers. To truly get CX started and going in your company, you got to start with culture. And the way you start with culture is, why are customers important? What's my role in serving them, right? And you literally have to go almost department by department to say, here's what we're trying to achieve, right? Back to the design stage. Here's what we're trying to achieve from a customer experience standpoint. Here's the role you play and the help we need from you. Right? Make them feel important, make them see their role. There's a great quote out there, and I forget the person's name. He used to be the CEO of Scandinavian Airlines, so I apologize for dropping the name here, but right, you're either serving the customer or you're serving the people that are serving the customer. So even for the corporate functions, get them to understand, how does HR play a role in enabling the front lines? How does what IT's working on, share knowledge and give them the tools to serve the customer? How does finance fund this, right? Get them to see the connection between their role and the customer.
Absolutely. Okay, well, we just have a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to hit on the last question here. And
Okay.
I know that a lot of our participants today and people joining us are not from, the Fortune 500 companies. They might have, smaller companies, smaller budgets, smaller teams, also can be very nimble. So if you were going to go into, a smaller company and thinking back to the greatest challenges you've had to overcome in implementing a CX program, like what would you be thinking about, the challenge there, and what would you kind of tackle?
Yeah, in many ways, and now look, I have to be honest, right? You introduced me 45, 50 minutes ago. I was at Compaq, I was at HP, I was at Avis, I was at Hertz, right? So I've been in the big company space. But I think in some In some ways, as you go into smaller companies, it's a little bit easier. Yes, resources are stretched thin. Everybody's wearing multiple hats and already doing 3 or 4 or 5 jobs. So, oh my God, I don't have time to do this on top of it. But the flip side of that is the scale is so much smaller. So you know, in a smaller company, you probably have a direct line of sight to the president, the owner, the CEO, you know, your senior VP. And so it's easier to have those conversations. It's also easier from a scale standpoint. What's one customer worth and what does it cost us when we lose one customer? What's churn worth to you? What's one customer worth? What's 10 customers worth? What's that negative review on Yelp or something worth? So in some ways, I think it's a little bit easier just because you can focus it more and say, hey, you know, Mr. Johnson who comes in here every Friday night and has the, you know, veal piccata, what if he stopped coming, right? What's that worth to us? So I think the principles are the same. It's just, yes, resources and dollars are constrained, but the principles still apply, right? How do you organize around the company? How do you look for the small wins? How do you tie it back to this is what's costing us the ability to grow, or this is causing us, you know, customers, kind of that proverbial leaky bucket, if you will. Hey, we're bringing in new customers, but they're, right, it's the marble jar. They're going out of the jar faster than they're coming in the jar. So, you know, in some ways, the scale is a little bit easier because you can point to individual customers and say, hey, Mr. Johnson stopped coming in. What's that worth to us?
Absolutely. Yeah, well, we're right at the top of the hour, Eric. I want to thank you so much. As always, I learned a lot, as I always do. And yeah, we've so much appreciated this. For all of you on the line, thank you so much for sharing the last hour with us. This recording will go out. You'll see it in your inbox in the next 24 hours or so. And please feel free to reach out to any of us if this sparks further questions or you want further conversation about it.
Thanks, Alexander, and thanks everybody for being here today.